NASA made this cool rover called Curiosity and sent it to Mars to see what else we can find out about the red planet, the one that will possibly become our next home. Curiosity has been exploring the surface of Mars, taking measurements, and gathering data about the planet for more than 10 years. And good old Curiosity stumbled upon some interesting wave-rippled rocks in the region of the Martian surface that was kind of expected to be drier. Scientists believe this area was actually a lake bed. It might be the bottom of a dried-up lake and all that sediment and other things that have accumulated there. All this can give us some important clues about the history of the lake. For instance, the types of organisms that might have lived there, how deep the lake was, how long it was there, and similar stuff. These wave-rippled patterns tell us that these rocks may have formed when strong Martian winds were moving the water in this big ancient lake. You know that specific sound you can hear when you're holding a seashell to your ear? You actually hear it because of the way the air gets trapped inside the shell and moves against its walls. The air cannot escape, so it vibrates at frequencies that depend on the size of the shell. In other words, you have a feeling you hear the sound of waves hitting a shore. That's Mars in my imagination now, a spot where you can still hear the long-lost sound of waves crashing against the shores of mysterious gigantic lakes. During its mission, Curiosity also came across a metallic object which turned out to be a meteorite. This unusual rock that came from space is made of nickel and iron. Its name is Cacao, and it's about the size of a small car, 6.5 feet long, and weighs over a ton. This is an important discovery because we don't often find metallic objects on the Martian surface. Most of the rocks there are made of basalt or some other volcanic materials, so that chunk of metal could tell us more about the history of Mars and how it formed. Plus, it definitely stands out. The surface of Mars is red from oxides, while Cacao is metallic-looking and dark gray. It's rounded and smooth, too, which means it once passed through Mars's atmosphere. There have been other robots exploring Mars, too. For instance, NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, MRO, stumbled upon circular sand dunes. Sand dunes are usually very common on the red planet. They come in many different shapes and sizes, but circular ones like these are really rare. They consist of dark sand with light-colored material surrounding them. And the cool thing is that these dunes are arranged in a specific pattern, similar to the spokes of a wheel. It could be because of the way the winds blow. But back to our buddy, Curiosity. It's been exploring many other interesting things, like oxygen levels in the Martian atmosphere. The levels change depending on the season. There's more oxygen in the spring and summer. It's still not clear why, though, and of course, even that is not enough for us to really breathe there. The concentration of oxygen on Mars is 0.1%, which is about 100 times less than the concentration in Earth's atmosphere. The atmosphere of Mars is mostly made up of carbon dioxide, with traces of other gases. Curiosity was so good that it also decided to analyze the age of rocks it found. It seems they're much older than we previously thought. Some of them date back more than 3 billion years. Curiosity found organic molecules in soil samples too. These molecules are basically building blocks of life. Now, this doesn't prove there's indeed life on Mars. It's just one of the things that suggests there might have been some form of life a long time ago. Curiosity discovered potential evidence that there might be a large reservoir of liquid water beneath the south polar ice cap, probably very salty and full of different minerals. This high salinity is the reason why this water could remain liquid at temperatures well below freezing. It would be cool to have some sort of subsurface ocean to take a dip in, especially when these crazy Martian winds are raging on the surface. And it would be great to have something that would protect us from those insane radiation levels on the red planet. There are some pretty toxic chemicals and salts in the Martian soil, which can be really bad for humans. Astronauts could potentially end up being exposed to these toxic chemicals, either through direct contact with the soil or by inhaling dust that contains these salts. Also, these substances could be a problem for growing crops. This is a really big discovery for long-term missions to Mars, because astronauts would need to be able to grow their own food so they can survive while there. Another thing that favors the idea of potential life on Mars is discovering methane there. Methane is a very important finding because usually living organisms produce this gas. So, where did it come from if not from them? In reality, there are a few possible explanations for that. One is the geological activity of underground reservoirs. Another idea is that meteorites brought methane to the red planet. What's interesting is that levels of methane are higher in particular areas. So, yeah, I don't know about you, but I'll stick to the theory that it comes from living organisms. Now, it's possible that volcanoes on Mars are still active. We know there are many extinct volcanoes on the red planet, but we've never found enough evidence to prove that some of them are still alive. Scientists studied volcanic deposits and found out that some volcanoes could have erupted maybe 50,000 years ago. Before that, everyone thought the last eruption happened 3 to 4 billion years ago. If you could compress the geological history of Mars into just one day, this would be like having an eruption a second ago. So, you never know. There might still be magma bubbling in secret under the Martian surface. All the future generations that might end up building their life there could really have some fun. Mars turned into a cold and barren place that can't really support life over time. And one of the main reasons for that was losing its atmosphere. The red planet used to have a much thicker atmosphere, similar to Earth's. One major reason for that is its relatively weak magnetic field. Earth's magnetic field helps protect our atmosphere from the solar wind, a stream of charged particles that comes from the sun. Without this protection, Mars had nothing to help it confront this insanely strong force that eventually took away most of its atmosphere. Another factor that played a big role in the loss of Mars's atmosphere is its relatively low gravity. Because Mars has weaker gravity than Earth, it's easier for gas molecules to escape into space. So Mars probably used to be more similar to our home planet. But with its current thin atmosphere, it can't keep any heat, which makes it very cold and very complicated for us to explore. But maybe it's better for us that we didn't visit the red planet back in its old times. There's this story about an ancient megaflood that might have happened there. So yes, the red planet probably used to be a wetter and more hospitable place than it is today, with beautiful flowing rivers and amazing lakes, ponds, and other bodies of water. And some research showed evidence of large channels carved into the planet's surface. These channels are way bigger than any we previously found on the planet. They suggest this megaflood happened billions of years ago. Perhaps it happened as a result of different factors, like volcanic activity, melting ice, and the release of carbon dioxide from the planet's crust. The flood may have created some temporary pools of water, too. Hopefully, it will mean more interesting clues for finding traces of microbial life. How about that?
Of all the creatures on our home planet, this could be the only animal that could survive harsh conditions on Mars. The tardigrade. These fellas have another name because of their unusual looks: water bears or moss piglets. They live literally everywhere across the globe, from coastal dunes to mountains, from the lush Amazon rainforests to the barren landscapes of Antarctica. Some live on land, but tardigrades are creatures that need water around their bodies to enable gas exchange and generally stay hydrated. That's why they prefer soil, moss, or leaves covered with a layer of water. And since they're aquatic creatures, they usually choose freshwater bodies like lakes, rivers, and ponds. You haven't come across these cool animals before because they're only 0.02 inches long. You can barely perceive them with the unaided eye. But since they're virtually immortal, we can assume they've developed some amazing survival tactics. If we loaded them in a tiny spaceship and sent them to Mars, they'd be a little shocked at first, especially because of the temperature. Sure, they can live through a wide range, even going below minus 458 degrees Fahrenheit and up to 302 degrees Fahrenheit. And Mars might seem like a very hot planet when you see it in pictures, but the temperatures there are actually low, way lower than on Earth. I mean, it's farther from the sun and has a thin atmosphere, so temperatures there can drop to minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit or go up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. On Earth, the lowest temperature was recorded in Antarctica. It was minus 128.6 degrees Fahrenheit, while the highest occurred in California, 134 degrees Fahrenheit. Tardigrades are also pretty resilient when it comes to strong pressure. They can take one that's 6 times bigger than the pressure at the bottom of the ocean. Now, for every 33 feet you go down below the surface, the pressure doubles. So, at a depth of 2.4 miles, the pressure is 380 times greater than at the surface. And in the very deepest parts of the ocean, it can be 1,100 times greater. The pressure on the red planet is about 6 times stronger than in the ocean depths. So I guess it's a little bit too much. It would be hard for these little creatures to adjust to such conditions. They would have to evolve through the next few generations to become even more resilient so that they could enjoy their time on Mars more. The food could be one of their main problems though. Some tardigrades mostly eat plants like moss, algae, or some flowering ones, and they like them served with a portion of bacteria. Others are carnivores that eat smaller tardigrades or other microscopic organisms. Well, they'd find nothing like this on Mars. So I guess we'd have to fill their tiny spaceships with lots of stashes of food they would be able to pull inside their tubular mouths. Now we're getting to the really tricky part: water. The red planet is a dry and dusty desert today. But come on, look at all those riverbanks and dried up deltas. Water must have flowed on its surface a long time ago. It's hard to understand where it all went, but it's highly possible most of the ancient water ended up trapped within minerals on the planet's crust. Some older research suggested that most of this water had escaped into space when the sun's radiation had ruined the atmosphere of Mars. But a new study has shown that only a little bit of water escaped, while most of it is still there, hidden and waiting for us to discover it. Also, a few years ago, researchers found signs of hydrated minerals on the slopes of the red planet, where they saw mysterious darkish streaks that seemed to flow. It mostly happens during warm seasons, since they fade when it gets cooler. These downhill flows could be evidence of real liquid water on Mars. Scientists have discovered some minerals that confirm this idea too. These minerals can lower the freezing point of water like salt does on icy roads. That's why scientists think there might be a shallow underground flow of briny water that causes these streaks. Tardigrades probably have excellent instincts, considering they can survive even in the toughest conditions. So they'd probably find water on Mars way before us. But even if they didn't do it right away, they would still have their tactics to stay alive for a while. If this creature loses 99% of its water content, it can survive by pausing most of its vital functions. It can remain in such a state for a couple of years. Tardigrades can absorb extremely strong impacts that would easily crush other animals, including us. They can withstand radiation levels so high that they could destroy a human. And even if we do send tardigrades to Mars one day, that won't be their first trip to space. In 2019, a spacecraft went to the moon, carrying thousands of tardigrades, the first lunar library, human DNA samples, and a DVD-sized archive that contained 30 million pages of information. The idea was to create archives of all the knowledge the human race had collected. But seconds before the spacecraft had to land, the mission control lost contact with it, and it crashed into the surface of the moon. The team was wondering what was going to happen with the spacecraft's cargo. After lots of discussion and analysis, they assumed that the library had survived, and even crazier, perhaps tardigrades had too. They were in this dehydrated kind of dormant state, so they shriveled up into tiny balls. They lowered their metabolism and expelled most of the water from their bodies, waiting for a better environment where they could be their best selves once again. These creatures can stay like this for decades and survive extremely harsh conditions. And this wasn't the first organized tour to space for tardigrades. In 2007, a team of scientists sent a group of these tiny water bears to orbit our home planet on the outside of a rocket for 10 days. They did pretty well, considering that when the rocket got back to Earth, 68% of these creatures were alive. Scientists don't put all their hopes only on these water bears. They keep testing if there are some other life forms that could survive on the red planet. They did an experiment called Biomex on the International Space Station. They took tiny organisms such as algae, bacteria, and other similar creatures and kept exposing them to really tough conditions in space for 18 months. This means things like huge changes in temperature, extreme radiation, and vacuum. The amazing part is that many of these tiny life forms survived these harsh conditions and came back to Earth as true space heroes. So they could probably deal with the hardships of living on Mars. Scientists studied archaea as well. Those are tiny ancient microorganisms that have existed in salty seawater on our planet for more than 3.5 billion years. Some of their relatives from the Arctic also survived in space-like conditions. But life on Mars doesn't have to be a whole new thing. Billions of years ago, the red planet might have been a bit like Earth. It most likely had water, and that's one of the key ingredients for life. Scientists believe tiny organisms called methanogens might have thrived there. They were hiding beneath the surface to stay safe from harsh radiation. These organisms could have breathed in hydrogen and carbon dioxide, exhaling methane gas. But as they gobbled up hydrogen, which was a powerful greenhouse gas back then, they might have cooled the planet too much. So it's possible these ancient microbes are still somewhere there, trapped in ice deep below the surface. They could be in a sort of deep sleep, waiting for better conditions to wake up, or some new cool friends from Earth. There are tons of weird things on Mars. Spoons, noodles, doors, even faces. Are they all really just rocks? Besides, it's not the only planet in our solar system full of mysterious things. Let's check them out. Recently, we found a strange thing on Mars that looks like a smooth, spoon-like object. It grabbed everyone's attention after NASA's Curiosity rover spotted it. The rock, with a handle and rounded tip, looks like it's floating in the rover's photo. People on the internet are puzzled about what it might be. Some are joking that it's a Martian's bowling pin, or even a shoehorn left by extraterrestrial creatures. But Andrew Good from NASA says it's not that exciting. Turns out it's just a rock shaped by the wind over a long time. These kinds of rocks with odd shapes are common on Mars. They're called ventifacts. Ventifact is a rock that can get scratched, dented, or smoothed out by tiny particles carried by the wind. You'll usually find these kinds of rocks in dry places where there's not much grass or trees to block the wind, and where there's a lot of sand blowing around. Sometimes, the wind can carve ventifacts into really cool shapes, like the mushroom rocks you can see in the White Desert National Park in Egypt. These rocks look like giant mushrooms because the wind wears away the bottom part faster than the top, making them stand tall and slim. Ventifacts aren't the only cool Martian rocks. Check out this series of surreal spikes protruding from the red surface. NASA's Curiosity rover stumbled upon them while exploring the Gale crater on Mars. They quickly caught everyone's attention. Twisting structures resembling spikes looked like some extraterrestrial doors. Even the SETI Institute, an organization focused on searching for extraterrestrial life, tweeted about the image, referring to it as a cool rock. But in reality, these are just hoodoos. These tall and thin spires occur when hard rock sits atop softer rock layers. Martian spikes are likely cemented fillings of ancient fractures in sedimentary rock, with softer material eroded away over time. Again, there are many hoodoos on Earth too. They're also called fairy chimneys or tent rocks. You can find them in places like Utah's Bryce Canyon and the Colorado Plateau. NASA is excited about these weird structures because they can help us learn more about the history of the Gale crater. There was also a rock that looked like a jelly donut. We called this rock Pinnacle Island. It was spotted by NASA's cameras. However, just 4 days earlier, it was nowhere to be seen. So how did it magically disappear? In a very anticlimactic way, it was kicked up by one of Opportunity's wheels as it traversed the Martian terrain. But there's still some mystery surrounding that jelly donut. Analysis revealed that Pinnacle Island contains unusually high levels of sulfur and manganese. Both of these things are water-soluble. In other words, there might have been some water action that created these elements in the rock. So this tiny thing suddenly caused a lot of drama, and an entire lawsuit against NASA. It claimed that the agency failed to investigate a possible fungus growing on Mars. Jelly donut fungus. But not all our findings are natural. Another puzzling discovery was this thing the Perseverance rover spotted. It's something that looks like tangled spaghetti or string. Just like the donut, this mysterious object showed up in a rover camera image and then vanished from the sandy ground in several days. It turns out that it could be debris from the rover's landing system. Perseverance landed in the Jezero crater in February 2021. It had a rough landing and accidentally scattered debris around. Some of these debris pieces have been showing up in the rover's images for a while now. The string-like object is likely a piece of shredded Dacron netting, which is a type of fiber used in thermal blankets. These blankets help regulate equipment temperatures during the super hot process of landing on Mars. It probably underwent significant unraveling and shredding due to strong forces during the landing. Thermal blankets lost a bunch of stuff back then. For example, this shiny foil piece spotted in June. The rover found it on a rock. What's remarkable is how far some of the debris has traveled. The rover landed about 1.2 miles away from where it's currently exploring. It's probably because the crash threw the debris into the air, and the Martian winds carried it over such a distance. Mars is known for its strong winds, which can move lightweight objects. However, while it's fun to stumble upon them on images, there are concerns about the debris and trash on Mars. We haven't even fixed this problem on Earth, and we're already creating it on Mars. The debris we left on the red planet is already accumulating in an area called Hog Wallow Flats. Plus, the debris can accidentally contaminate the sample tubes used for collecting Martian rocks. So far, NASA isn't overly worried about this, but they're keeping a close eye on it to prevent any issues with the rovers. Now, how about not things, but animals? Curiosity caused quite a stir when it captured something that looked like a rat on Mars. Some started speculating that it could be evidence of indigenous Martian life, or even that this rodent was brought along by Curiosity. But the Mars rat, once again, turned out to be just a weird rock. It looked interesting because of the natural processes like wind erosion and mechanical abrasion. We also found some worm-looking things. Curiosity snapped a picture of a formation that looks like worms wriggling across the Martian landscape. Despite its tiny size, this formation stands out with its unique shape and rough texture. It's probably made of durable material resistant to Mars's harsh erosion. And finally, our top mysterious finding is the face on Mars. Cydonia is a region on Mars that has captured both scientific and popular interest. It's located in Mars's northern hemisphere. It lies between heavily cratered regions to the south and relatively smooth plains to the north. There's a theory that the northern plains may have once been ocean beds. Maybe Cydonia was once a coastal zone. This place is full of interesting and beautiful features that tell us a lot about the history of the Red Planet. But its most interesting feature was the Martian face. This thing gained widespread attention when it was snapped by the Viking 1 orbiter in 1976. Some believed that it was evidence of a long-lost Martian civilization. At first, NASA dismissed it as a trick of light and shadow. But after some analysis, it turned out to be, another rock. We also saw a face of a bear. It was captured by the high-resolution imaging experiment camera. In an image, we can see a circular fracture pattern that looks like a bear's head, with two craters forming the eyes and a V-shaped collapse structure like the nose. The head likely formed because something heavy settled on top of an old hole in the ground. This hole was filled with either lava or mud. The nose-like feature is speculated to be a volcanic or mud vent. But why do we keep seeing these strange things on Mars? Sometimes our brains can trick us into seeing things like faces or objects in rocks and other things. But these are just illusions called pareidolia. Pareidolia is a psychological phenomenon that makes us see familiar patterns or shapes, especially faces, where none actually exist. It's because the brain encounters something it doesn't recognize or understand right away. It tries to find things that look the most like this one. So it sees random patterns, textures, or sounds as something meaningful and recognizable. That's why a chair and clothes on it seems like a super creepy human-like figure at night. It also causes you to see faces or shapes in clouds, or hear recognizable sounds and even words in random noise. It's a fascinating proof of the power of our perception, but we also should be careful with it and not let our imagination run wild.
There are planet-wide dust storms on Mars. Just like on Earth, wind constantly blows on Mars, grinding away at the geology. The wind creates a lot of dust, which eventually gets whipped up into large clouds. Those dust clouds absorb sunlight and heat up, making the winds more intense. Without any rain or oceans, every few years, the clouds grow so large that they wrap around the entire planet and create a giant dust storm. In 2018, the Curiosity rover witnessed one of these great storms from the Martian surface. It noted that sunlight on the planet decreased by 97%, and many large sand dunes were left behind after the storm ended. Mars is home to the largest volcano in the solar system, Olympus Mons. The giant volcano is 14 miles tall. That's about 2.5 times the size of Mount Everest. The volcano was formed millions of years ago, a time when Mars was covered with countless volcanoes, spewing molten lava across the planet's surface. Olympus Mons is a shield volcano, so rather than spitting out lava and flames up into the air, lava would flow slowly down the sides of the volcano. This gives it its low, squat appearance and an average slope of only 5%. At only a few million years old, Olympus Mons is still a fairly young volcano. Because of this, scientists believe that it could potentially still be active, so maybe it could erupt at some time in the future. There are 3 other massive shield volcanoes on Mars, called Tharsis Montes. By Earth standards, they're humongous, ranging from 233 to 295 miles in diameter. They're not as tall as Olympus Mons, though, the highest peak there being 9.2 miles. Despite its dusty and rusty appearance, Mars is still a geologically active planet. There are even Marsquakes. The tectonic plates under the surface of the planet move from time to time, shaking the ground. The largest known fault on Mars is called Valles Marineris. It's a 2,500-mile-long canyon system that makes the Grand Canyon on Earth look like a dwarf. In August 2021, the InSight robotic lander detected a Marsquake with a magnitude of 4.2 that started from the huge canyon, which confirmed it to be active still. There's convincing evidence that Mars once had liquid water on and beneath its surface. For one, the Opportunity rover found rock spiracules not far away from its landing site. Their shape, position, and mineral content strongly suggest that they could only be formed in a watery environment. So they must have been formed in pools of water in the ancient times, likely billions of years ago. Second, there are grooves in the Martian soil that are very much indicative of water streams, which might have run along the planet's surface. It's been an unimaginable amount of time since they were there, and all those streams have long since dried out, but the channels they left behind them prove there was once actual rivers of liquid water. The sunrise and sunset on Mars are bluish-gray. There have been several photos of them taken since the 1970s, the very first one made by the Viking 1 lander in 1976. It showed rusty red rocks on the Martian ground and a pale yellow sky, much paler than it usually is. The Sun is much farther away from Mars than it is from Earth, which makes it look about a third smaller. The numerous particles of red dust in the atmosphere make the sky appear orange, sometimes even closer to red. But at dawn and dusk, the situation changes. The blue light penetrates the atmosphere a bit better than the rest of the spectrum, directly where the Sun is in the sky. It's especially obvious at sunset, with the light having to fight through more dust particles when coming from just above the horizon. The dust is fine enough to let more blue light through, the situation exactly opposite to that on Earth, where blue light is almost blocked by particles in the atmosphere, making sunsets all kinds of pink, orange, and red. At dawn, it's much the same on Mars, only the sky often appears more gray than blue, and twilights are much longer after sunset and before sunrise on the red planet, because there's a lot of fine dust high up in the atmosphere. It scatters more light into the night part of the sky, making the twilight last up to 2 hours after sunset or before actual dawn. Such long twilights sometimes happen on Earth too. When a powerful volcano erupts ash and dust high up into the atmosphere, it scatters in the sky and can cause twilights lasting much longer for some time. They're also the reason for extremely vibrant sunrises and sunsets. The Curiosity rover found a site scientists call Yellowknife Bay. This site once contained an ancient lake. The rover discovered materials left behind from the waters, showing that the lake water was not too acidic or too salty. It would have had a balanced pH. Carbon, nitrogen, and other elements that could potentially support life were all found within the crater of the ancient lake. And most important of all, Curiosity found potential sources of energy for microbial life. So maybe there could be life on Mars after all. Mars's atmosphere was once much thicker, which was precisely the reason why there used to be liquid and flowing water on its surface. In the past few billion years, though, scientists believe the Sun has been striking the atmosphere of the red planet, slowly but steadily removing its outer layers. The solar winds must have been hitting the atmosphere hard enough for the lighter hydrogen molecules from the top layers to be scattered and drawn into outer space. With time, this could have caused the atmosphere to become thinner and thinner, until it wasn't thick enough to support flowing water. And that was likely the time Mars had started turning into the rusty red and barren planet we know today. At some point in the future, Mars might get rings like Saturn. Scientists believe the rings around the gas giant might have appeared after a moon or even several ones got too close to Saturn and got ripped apart. It's their rock and ice debris now orbiting in close proximity to the planet. Mars also has 2 moons, Phobos and Deimos, and the former is doomed. Mars attracted them both from outer space with its gravity long ago, and they've since been locked in the planet's orbit. But while Deimos has a constant orbit, Phobos gets steadily closer to Mars with every turn. For clarity, our moon goes a full orbit around Earth roughly every 27 days, while the planet itself rotates around its axis every 24 hours. The moon slows down the rotation of Earth and slowly gets away from us to compensate for that. Phobos, on the contrary, goes around Mars in a full orbit about every 8 hours, while it takes Mars 25 hours to rotate around its axis. Basically, Phobos makes 3 full turns around its planet in a single day. At such a rate, it makes Mars rotate more quickly and compensates for that with getting closer and closer to its planet. According to calculations, Phobos has from 30 to 50 million years left before it enters the Roche limit, the point at which the tidal forces between the moon's near and far sides are so different they literally tear it apart. Phobos will be destroyed and scattered in the orbit of Mars as numerous asteroids, and those will crumble into even smaller pieces. Eventually, the red planet will gain its own ring, just like Saturn. But that won't be the end of it. Mars's gravity will pull this space debris in, resulting in a hailstorm of falling rocks and metal on its surface. Despite Mars being 140 million miles away from us on average, pieces of it can be found on Earth too. Some very long time ago, Mars was bombarded with asteroids, hence the craters on its surface. Its weak atmosphere still allows space bodies inside, but that's not a frequent event nowadays. Back in the day, though, some asteroids were so big they raised clouds of debris high up into the atmosphere. Most of it fell back to the surface of Mars, but some pieces were ejected into space, and certain ones were large and sturdy enough to enter the Earth's atmosphere and fall on the ground without disintegrating. Scientists have found plenty of such space rocks, and they're pretty sure they came to us all the way from Mars, because their composition is similar to the samples examined by the mission sent to the Red Planet. By the way, there's some chance that pieces of ancient Earth might also be found on other planets, Mars included. Hey, we get around, don't we? Given that millions of years ago Earth was also struck by powerful asteroids, some debris from those impacts might have traveled into outer space in a similar way. The year 2022 was rich in amazing discoveries. Let's have a look at the most impressive of them. The newest of NASA's rovers, Perseverance, keeps exploring the surface of the Red Planet. Right now, it's hunting for signs of ancient life in the Jezero crater. That's a 28-mile-wide impact crater. It was likely once filled with water. While trekking across the crater's floor, the rover spotted several surprising things. One of them was a weird purple coating on a few rocks. It was strangely similar to rock varnish formed by microbes on our planet. Scientists haven't figured out what it is yet. The rover has also been very successful in adding new samples to its rock collection. It's got 14 pieces of rock. They'll be stored on the surface of Mars for future missions to collect. NASA and the European Space Agency have been developing different plans for getting hold of these samples. Most of them involve a few spacecraft and even several helicopters. How about something more down to Earth? In June, a giant freshwater stingray was discovered in the Mekong River in Cambodia. A fisherman called Mao Tong accidentally snagged it while fishing. He called researchers, claiming the stingray was way larger than anything he had ever seen. The scientists arrived and found out that the creature measured 13 feet from snout to tail. It also weighed a staggering 660 pounds. This made it the largest freshwater fish that had ever been recorded. It was even certified by the Guinness World Records. Another animal-related discovery: scientists have found evidence that spiders might see dreams. One scientist studying these creatures noticed that when snoozing, little arachnids jerked while dangling from a thread with their legs curled. It resembled the way cats and dogs twitch while dreaming. The researchers set up a whole lab to observe spiders. The resulting study revealed that jumping spiders indeed experienced a sleep-like state that included the rapid eye movement stage. And with 8 eyes, that's a lot of twitching. Researchers identified the remains of a 17th-century Spanish galleon. It was found near Oregon's north coast. Experts think that those are the remains of Santo Cristo de Burgos. In 1693, this vessel was traveling from the Philippines to Mexico, but at one point it veered off its course and disappeared. The lost galleon was known as the beeswax wreck. It got such a name because it was carrying blocks of beeswax. People had known about the ship for a long time, since parts of its cargo were often washed up on shore. But until recently, no one knew the name of the ship. But then researchers analyzed timbers discovered in a cave near Astoria. The analysis revealed that those were made from hardwood used to build ships in Asia in the 17th century, which meant the mysterious vessel was the perfect match for Santo Cristo de Burgos. Now, early in 2022, scientists noticed something alarming in West Antarctica. They already knew that the wedge of the continent sitting south of Argentina might raise the sea level by 10 feet. The thing is, our world is changing, and some of that ice is going to melt one day. But that's not the worst news. Experts spotted ominous hints that a massive collapse could occur really soon. A large ice shelf cracked suddenly. This ice shelf stops the ice sheet from slipping into the ocean and melting away. If this rupture widens, it might kick off a catastrophic chain reaction. Elsewhere, it was January when a submarine volcano, known as Hunga Tonga Hunga Hahapai in the Kingdom of Tonga, erupted. The event was unlike any other witnessed in recent decades. The blast was so powerful that it sent a pressure wave all over the globe, and it traveled around the world not once, but several times. It also produced giant tsunami waves. Scientists claim that everything about the eruption was extremely weird. For example, how insanely powerful it was, or the cascade of effects that followed. The eruption excavated more than 2 cubic miles of rock from the seafloor, becoming the largest volcanic blast in the past 100 years. It also unleashed tons of volcanic rubble and hot ash that moved along the seafloor for a whopping 50 miles. Also in January, scientists discovered a site in southeastern Australia with rocks that contained a breathtaking record of life. The fossils found at McGrath's Flat are estimated to be from 11 to 16 million years old. Those are soft-bodied small creatures, including spiders, and they're preserved in such extraordinary detail that you can even see the spider's leg hairs. The researchers also managed to spot tiny pores in fossilized leaves. Those pores used to take in carbon dioxide. Scientists discovered several new snail species while searching for animals in Southeast Asia, and they believe that 2 of these species are the smallest of all seen before. One of them lies in Vietnamese caves and is a mere 0.02 inches in length, which means if you decided to put them on a U.S. quarter, many hundreds would fit there. Now, I bet you heard of NASA's James Webb Telescope. It's a giant infrared instrument, and it's floating in space millions of miles away from our planet. It spent the first part of 2022 preparing to take its first images, and in July, the world finally saw those pictures. The images of the cosmos taken by the telescope are incredibly detailed. In fact, one picture was even called the deepest view of the universe ever. Among other pictures, there is a now iconic image of the Carina Nebula. Another one is a stunning view of Neptune's rings. At the moment, the telescope has a long list of observations it has to do. It's supposed to explore everything, from distant exoplanets to the oldest galaxies out there. Now, you probably know that 65 million years ago, give or take, life on planet Earth changed forever after a 6.5-mile-wide asteroid crashed into our planet. This catastrophic event caused a mass extinction, which, in turn, led to 3/4 of all species, including dinos, disappearing from the face of the Earth. In February, scientists got exciting new information about the disaster. They studied some fish fossils and concluded that the asteroid had hit Earth during spring in the northern hemisphere. Another discovery was made in March. It turns out that right after the impact, rocks started to rain down more than 1,000 miles away from the impact site. And in August, scientists found something that could be a fragment of the asteroid off the coast of West Africa. It probably broke off and slammed into Earth separately, leaving an undersea crater. Now, brace yourself. Earlier this year, scientists grew brain cells in a lab and taught them to play video games. Yeah, I know, that's wild. Researchers from Australia claim they created the so-called mini-brains that could sense and respond to their environment. Each brain consisted of 800,000 cells. When viewing video games, they produced electrical activity. And even though they often missed the ball in a particular game, the connection rate was higher than a totally random chance. A research team funded by the National Geographic Society discovered a curious fossil in August 2022. It belongs to the oldest dinosaur found in Africa, this guy, whose name I can't pronounce. This ancient creature lived about 230 million years ago. It was one of the earliest ancestors of sauropods that we know about. This group includes such long-necked giants as the Brontosaurus. But unlike them, the dino we're talking about wasn't a giant. Scientists think it was probably a mere 2 feet tall at the hip. And some more great news. We now know for sure how to nudge asteroids off track. NASA made a spaceship known as DART crash into an asteroid. The main goal of this experiment was to check whether such a collision could change the course of the asteroid, knocking it off its orbit. This method could help us avoid a potentially catastrophic asteroid strike. The spacecraft, which cost $325 million and was the size of a vending machine, slammed into asteroid Dimorphos at a speed of 14,000 miles per hour. The spaceship burst into pieces right away. But the mission still seemed to be a success since Dimorphos was indeed affected by the collision to a measurable degree. So, maybe we won't need Bruce Willis and his gang after all. We've been dreaming about life on Mars for a long time. Not only about growing potatoes there in the future, but also about all the potatoes that could have been there in the past. Has there ever been life on Mars? Recently, scientists have found something that could be evidence of that. Let's find out what happened. Mars is the fourth planet from the Sun. A human hasn't set foot on Mars yet, but robots have set their wheels. The first spacecraft that visited the Red Planet were NASA Viking landers. They flew there back in 1976 and sent us a lot of interesting data. Back then, we didn't know anything about Mars. To us, it looked like a cold, lifeless desert. But since we're so similar, scientists began to wonder, has it always been like this? Or is it possible that once Mars used to be thriving and full of life? And in 2022, NASA's Mars rover Perseverance found something that could shed a light on this mystery. But first of all, what is Perseverance? Scientists have suggested that if there was life on Mars once, it's unlikely that it could simply disappear without a trace. It must have left some traces, perhaps underground, where they would be protected from radioactive solar tantrums and other nastiness. So we need to check the rocks. It's important to note that we aren't looking for life on Mars right now. There most likely isn't any. Instead, we want to look into the distant past of our twin planet. We're talking billions of years ago, when Mars could have been warm, green, and far from lifeless. In other words, we have to find dead microbes and various chemical compounds similar to ones on the Earth. This is the mission of our main character, Perseverance. It arrived on Mars in February of 2021. The spacecraft landed on the bottom of the 30-mile-wide Jezero crater, and after landing, it scooted over to the west, to the place that prompted scientists to choose Jezero for research. This place is a dried-up river delta, and this former river is already more than 3.5 billion years old. The Jezero crater itself was once a large lake. Yup, apparently there was life on Mars, and scientists have suggested that these places would be perfect as bodyguards of microbes. That's exactly what bacteria do on Earth. They hide, being still in the depths of lakes and ponds, so we could probably find traces there. The researchers believe that this particular lake has the highest scientific value in the entire mission. The highest chance to find rocks on which such bacteria could survive is here in Jezero. So Perseverance went to the delta. The row wasn't easy though. The rover missed a little and landed further than planned. As one famous movie said, "This little maneuver's going to cost us 51 years." Fortunately, Perseverance took only 1 year, and on the way, it was able to explore Jezero a little. The rover uses a complex built-in tool to explore the world. The tool is called Scanning Habitable Environments with Raman and Luminescence for Organics and Chemicals, or just SHERLOC. Boy, NASA sure loves its acronyms. As the device approached the delta, the signal of organic molecules became stronger. Soon, these signals were everywhere, and besides, they were the brightest that the scientists have ever seen. What does it mean? Elementary, my dear Watson. You know, Sherlock. It's time to dig. Since July 2021, Perseverance has drilled and collected 4 thin cores of sedimentary rock. The total number of collected rocks at the moment is 12. This is the first time in history that we're collecting something like this on another planet. These 4 cores were found on 2 rocks called Skinner Ridge and Wildcat Ridge. The first pair of cores, the ones from the Skinner Ridge, don't seem very interesting at first glance. They're quite close to what we can find in many places on Earth. However, if we look at them closer, we'll see that they're dotted with round grains of some dark material. These dark grains could have once been deposited on them by an ancient river, the same one that flowed into Jezero. It's possible that the river brought them from places hundreds of miles away from Jezero. And that's pretty cool. If we study these cores, we'll be able to learn even more about the far corners of Mars. Well, there are no corners on it, but you get the idea. Then, in April 2022, Perseverance did arrive at the delta, and then scientists finally found what they were looking for. The discovery, to put it mildly, excited them. They found 2 more cores, which held organic substances. This pair was taken from the Wildcat Ridge. It's found very close to the Skinner Ridge, but the 2 rocks are quite different from each other. These samples are lighter in color and more uniform. Most likely, they're mudstone, an unusual rock similar to clay, but harder and unable to absorb water. They're also finer grained than the cores of the Skinner Ridge. Why does it matter? Because the finer the grains in the stone, the more likely it is that there may be some traces of a past life in it. On Earth, fine-grained stones most often lie on the bottoms of ponds and in similar places. There, they can preserve the remains of dead organisms and similar stuff for years. And this is exactly what we found on them. Additionally, according to scientists, there was more organic matter in these 2 cores than in any other place studied by Perseverance so far. It probably accumulated there while the lake was gradually evaporating billions of years ago. So, there really was life on Mars? Well, let's slow down a little. Organic substances are molecules holding carbon. And yes, on Earth, they're most often associated with life, but not always. Sometimes they can form as a result of other things. Therefore, we cannot say for sure whether there was life on Mars. We don't know if these molecules really remain from some Martian microbes, or if they're the result of some other things. But the discovery is still very significant. We have to literally keep digging this way. To learn more about this organic matter, scientists need to collect a couple more samples of fine-grained rock. It would also be great to study the material lying around these former reservoirs. Perseverance has already moved to another area, to a place with a beautiful name, Enchanted Lake. Now it needs to look for similar things there. It will also continue to study Lake Jezero. Eventually, Perseverance will climb to the top of the delta and then continue exploring ancient sites outside the crater. Sometime before the end of 2022, Perseverance will probably have 6 or more samples of the Martian cores. Unfortunately, its tools, though complex, are quite limited. This data alone won't be enough for us to get a complete picture. Therefore, NASA plans to send other spacecraft to Jezero in the coming years. Together with the European Space Agency, they're working on the next robotic mission, known as the Mars Sample Return. The name speaks for itself. These devices will arrive and take away all the test tubes from the old Prospector Perseverance. After that, these samples will be delivered to Earth, though not by Amazon Prime, and then scientists will be able to analyze them in advanced laboratories. However, all this will take a really long time. The launch of this mission is scheduled for 2027-2028, and the spacecrafts won't be able to return until 2033. But if everything goes well, it will be the first samples in history delivered to Earth from Mars. In other words, there's still enough space for research, literally. And yes, we don't yet know the true meaning of these finds. But that's why the entire mission was created, right? And who knows? Maybe in a few years we'll finally find out the truth about what happened on Mars billions of years ago. Ooh, check out the Martian! Made you look. It's staring at you, and you're staring at it. A giant eye that seems to be pulling you into an abyss. You're hovering over it in your spacecopter. But however scared you might be, you still need to do your job. So you send your copter down to the surface of the red planet. Right, that's where you are, on Mars. But first things first, you take a moment to remember everything you know about the 4th planet from the Sun. It's the last of the inner planets. Those are the planets that lie within the asteroid belt. They're also called terrestrial, since they're made up of rocks and metals. The atmosphere of Mars is much thinner than Earth's, It contains 95% carbon dioxide and a mere 1% of oxygen. In other words, don't even think about pulling off your helmet. Anyway, there's no time to waste. You land on the surface of the planet and find yourself in a brownish-red world. That's a good thing you're wearing a spacesuit. This place is freezing cold. The thermometer sewn into the sleeve of your suit shows minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Time to take your first step on the Martian surface. The planet looks quite colorful, and the hue of a particular area depends on the minerals that make up the soil. The ground under your feet is covered in fine dust. It looks like rust. The same orange dust is in the air. Good thing you have your own supply of oxygen and don't need to breathe Martian air. The layer of this dust covering the surface of Mars can be from 6 to 40 feet thick. You hope you'll avoid getting swallowed by some Martian quicksand. You start walking, feeling very light. Mars is just 15% of our planet's volume and a mere 11% of Earth's mass. It means that gravity here is much weaker. Its pull is 38% as strong as the pull of gravity on the surface of Earth. You jump up and down and then try to run several hundred feet. You haven't even broken a sweat. What makes it harder for you to explore the place on foot is that the planet's surface is rocky, covered with craters and volcanoes, old dry lake beds, and canyons. You see something huge towering on the horizon, but you try to suppress your curiosity. You'll have enough time to figure out what it is later. Suddenly, a massive cloud appears in the distance. It looks as if a huge herd of horses is approaching you. In reality, you better get back into your copter and fly away as fast as you can. That's one of Mars's infamous dust storms. They mostly occur during the summer in the southern hemisphere of the red planet. They can sometimes cover the entire planet, and you see the largest ones from Earth. You hop into your copter and set a course for the eye that scared you so much. Winding channels that look like veins run through the eyeball. But the closer you get, the less it looks like an actual eye. Soon you realize it's a crater. It's giant, almost 19 miles across. Around the crater, which looks as if it has a pupil, there are other even bigger craters. They likely formed billions of years ago. That's when Mars had to withstand multiple attacks of space rocks. But why is the eye crater darker than the surrounding landscape? Scientists think that once there was Martian water in the enormous pit. Remember those channels? They were likely carrying that water. And since the crater was filled with water, it stopped some substances and minerals from eroding away. Now, remember that towering something on the horizon? It's time to go and explore it. When you come close, you realize it's the largest shield volcano in the entire solar system, Olympus Mons. It's more than 370 miles in diameter, which is almost the same size as the state of Arizona. You tilt your head. Wow! The mountain is 16 miles high. It's also rimmed by 4-mile-high cliffs. To picture the sheer size of the volcano, let's make some comparisons. The largest volcano on Earth is Mauna Loa, towering around 2.5 miles above sea level and stretching 75 miles across. Sounds impressive. But the volume of Olympus Mons is around 100 times larger than that of Mauna Loa. The Martian giant could swallow the whole chain of Hawaiian Islands from Kauai to Hawaii. But why is this volcano so large? It might be the result of lower surface gravity and higher eruption rates. Or the reason might be the red planet's crust, which is very different from Earth's. It's static. You see, on our planet, the crust is made of 15 to 20 moving tectonic plates. As plates move over hotspots producing lava, new volcanoes form, and the already existing ones become extinct. That's why lava can get to the surface through many vents. But on Mars, the crust isn't broken into the same tectonic plates as on Earth, and the lava has nothing to do but pile in one very, very large volcano. So, how about getting closer to the enormous mountain? But once you step out of your copter on Martian soil, the ground under your feet starts shaking. Well, that's a Marsquake. But how can it happen if Mars doesn't have any actively shifting tectonic plates? Specialists from NASA are sure Marsquakes occur when energy inside the planet gets suddenly released. It leads to rock fractures and cracks in the planet's crust. Another powerful jolt and one of such cracks opens right next to you. You fall to the ground, afraid to move, but soon everything calms down. You wait for a couple of minutes, just to be sure, and get up. Oh look! Here's a perfect opportunity to explore the insides of the red planet. The crack is large enough to send a special research robot. The planet's crust is thin and consists of volcanic basalt rock. The mantle that surrounds the core of the planet is made up of thick silicates, oxygen, and some minerals. You can probably compare it with soft, rocky toothpaste. Mars's mantle is also much thinner than Earth's. It's just 800 to 1100 miles thick. As for the planet's core, it's made mostly of iron, nickel, and sulfur and is between 900 and 1200 miles wide. This core doesn't move. That's why Mars doesn't have a planet-wide magnetic field. Unfortunately, your drone is now lost in the depths of the red planet. You leave it there and continue your exploration. Your next destination is Valles Marineris. It sounds more like an Italian red sauce, but it's actually an enormous canyon, or rather a canyon system, that runs along Mars's equator. It's as awe-inspiring as Olympus Mons, more than 2,600 miles long and over 4 miles deep. The thing is so huge, it could span the entire continental United States from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean. Now let's make another comparison. One of the most famous canyons on Earth is the Grand Canyon in Arizona, but it's 10 times shorter and around 4 times less deep than this canyon on Mars. Some scientists think that Valles Marineris is the edge of an enormous tectonic plate. It moves so slowly that almost nothing has happened in that region over millions of years, and the movement of this plate probably began 3.5 billion years ago. Anyway, the only thing left on your today's to-do list is to visit Mars's moons. They're among the tiniest in the solar system. Phobos is the largest of the two. It orbits a mere 3,700 miles above the surface of Mars. There's no other known moon that travels closer to its mother planet. It whips around the red planet 3 times a day, while the second moon, Deimos, needs 30 hours to complete one orbit. Phobos is getting closer and closer to Mars, about 6 feet each 100 years. Within the next 50 million years, it'll either crash into the planet or break apart and form a ring. Happy but tired, you return to your spaceship. Tomorrow, you'll continue exploring the magnificent red planet, and who knows what discoveries are awaiting you. Have we found another civilization? Is that a door to someone's home on another planet? Can we peek through the windows? After all, it was NASA's Curiosity rover that sent this image to Earth, and right now, this rover is exploring the surface of Mars. Unfortunately, astronomers were fast to disappoint us. They claimed that it was just a natural part of the Martian landscape. There are several clues that made them think it wasn't a real door. For example, it's tiny, a mere 3 feet high. But it might simply mean the Martians aren't that tall, you may object. But scientists keep insisting that what looks like a door is actually an opening in a rock created by natural forces, like winds and erosion. The thing is, if you look at the rock attentively, you may notice strata, the layers of silt that stand out because they're harder than the surrounding material. These strata dip here on the left and a bit higher on the right. They likely appeared around 4 billion years ago in a river or a wind-blown dune. Since the strata became visible, powerful Martian winds have eroded them even more, and now you can see that they disappear inside the door. And look at this. See those cracks? Yeah, those. That's how rocks weather on the red planet. This small cave probably formed when several fractures crossed the strata. A pretty large boulder might have fallen out under its own weight, and this created the door-shaped opening. Now, this theory is quite plausible, because even though the gravity on Mars isn't as strong as on Earth, it's still strong enough to do it. Besides, see that rock to the right of the opening? It has a suspiciously smooth vertical edge. It must be the culprit. It probably fell out not so long ago, and Martian winds haven't got rid of it yet. And winds on Mars can be exceptionally powerful. This planet is infamous for its intense dust storms. Sometimes they kick up so much dust that you can see it through a telescope on Earth. Such storms occur every year and cover continent-sized areas. They also last for weeks at a time. But besides these annual storms, there are even larger storms that happen much more rarely, but they're more powerful and way more intense. Those are called global dust storms because they encircle the entire planet. But even if you got caught in the most severe storm on Mars, it wouldn't be as terrible as you might think. The wind speed on the worst Martian storms reaches 60 miles an hour tops. Hurricane-force winds on our planet can be twice that speed. You should also keep in mind that the atmosphere on the red planet is 1% as dense as the atmosphere on Earth. That's why, if you decided to fly a kite on Mars, you'd need the wind to be much faster than on Earth. Otherwise, you wouldn't even be able to get the kite in the air. In other words, even though it's quite windy on Mars, it doesn't feel as intense as on our home planet. Oh, by the way, you might have noticed I keep calling Mars the red planet. Why? Look, our neighbor is covered in dust, soil, and rock that is rich in iron oxide. That's what gives the surface of the planet its trademark red hue. And look, there's the trademark. Nah, just kidding. Mars is the fourth planet from the Sun. Not so far away from the star, you might say, and still, it's a cold and deserted world. The average temperature on its surface is minus 81 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you ever visit one of its poles during the wintertime, bring a lot of warm clothing, because the temperatures are likely to drop to minus 220 degrees there. In the summer, though, you might feel very comfortable in some regions. There, the temperatures can rise to 70 degrees, not very different from what we're used to. Mars is one of the most explored space bodies in the solar system. At the moment, NASA has 2 rovers roaming the red landscapes, Curiosity and Perseverance. There's also one lander called InSight and helicopter Ingenuity, nicknamed Ginny. Perseverance is the most advanced and largest rover ever sent to another world. The journey to the red planet took 203 days, and Ginny traveled to Mars attached to the belly of Perseverance. Sounds cozy. And now, I'm going to tell you something really curious. Let's say you're a Babylonian who lived around 5,000 years ago. Babylonia was an empire in ancient Mesopotamia. Just think back to 6th grade. Anyway, your neighbor comes up to you and says, "What day is it today?" And what do you answer? "It's Mars Day." Wait, what? When the ancient Babylonians created the week, they decided to divide it into 7 parts. Each day got named after some space body, like the Moon, the Sun, Venus, and so on. Mars Day was on Tuesday. The Babylonians believed that each of these space objects influenced their lives on the day named after it. And since Mars was red in color, they associated it with aggression. That's why on Tuesdays, they had special ceremonies to avoid the influence of the unfriendly planet. Indeed, Mars might seem unfriendly to a tired traveler. Its atmosphere is very thin. Its volume is a near 1% of the atmosphere on Earth. In other words, there's 99% less air to breathe on the red planet. Mars's atmosphere is mostly made up of carbon dioxide. At such high concentrations, it's toxic for us humans. And if you were looking for some oxygen to breathe on Mars, you'd come away empty-handed. There's only 0.1% of oxygen in the air on the red planet. That's definitely not enough for you to survive there. At the moment, Mars has 2 moons, Deimos and Phobos. Astronomers think they may be asteroids once caught in the gravitational field of the planet. The moons are shaped like potatoes. That's because their mass is too little for gravity to give them a spherical form. Potatoes, eh? Maybe they should be renamed mashed and au gratin. One day, Mars will get a ring of its own. It might happen in the next 20 to 40 million years. Will Brightside be there? Stay tuned. Mars's gravitational forces will tear apart the planet's largest moon, Phobos. Hey, it really will get mashed. Some chunks of the former moon will crash into Mars, and others will break apart and create the ring around the planet. This ring might exist for at least 100 million years. The surface of Mars is cut by a huge canyon system known as Valles Marineris. Sounds like a pasta sauce. If it were on Earth, it'd stretch all the way from New York to California, over 3,000 miles. At its widest part, the largest canyon on Mars is 200 miles, and it reaches 4 miles at its deepest point. If you still have difficulties imagining the sheer size of this natural phenomenon, here you go. Valles Marineris is 10 times the size of the Grand Canyon on Earth. Now, since we're on the subject of gigantic things, let's talk about Olympus Mons. This is the largest volcano in the solar system, and it's on Mars too. It's 3 times as tall as Mount Everest on our planet. and that's the tallest mountain above sea level. And the base of Olympus Mons is as large as the state of New Mexico. Now, scientists think there could have been water on Mars in the past. What made them think so? They found lots of ancient river valley networks and lake beds on the surface of the red planet. Plus, on Mars, there are minerals and rocks that could only form in liquid water. Mars might even have experienced terrible floods 3.5 billion years ago. These days, there's still some water on the red planet, but Mars's atmosphere is too thin for this water to stay in its liquid form on the surface. Now, it only exists in the form of water ice. You can find it just under the surface of the planet in its polar regions. The only place where this water is visible is at the North Polar Ice Cap. Also, sometimes, salty water flows down crater walls and hillsides, and there are tiny quantities of water in the planet's atmosphere, but it only exists as vapor. So, as a vacation spot, I think I'll pass.
You take a rocket to the moon. It lands. You put on your work uniform and go to work your shift at a local factory that extracts water from beneath the surface of the moon. There's also fuel plants here. Dozens of people and rovers are roaming the expanse of Earth's natural satellite. When your shift ends, you board the rocket again. It takes you back home, just like a regular bus. That's exactly what NASA is planning to do. In the first stage of this project is the Prime 1 mission. Prime stands for Polar Resources Ice Mining Experiment. The mission starts in 2022. Let's follow it step by step. A booster rocket and second stage are assembled on the launch pad. Ignition. The rocket's engines begin to burn fuel, and we go up. Soon, the rocket reaches a speed of about 24,000 miles per hour. At that speed, you could travel the distance from New York to London in just 8 minutes. Once the booster uses up all its fuel, it undocks and makes a soft landing on Earth. The second stage with the payload capsule fires its engines a couple of seconds after the first stage undocks, so the rocket continues moving up. Once it reaches orbit, the payload capsule opens. It releases the lunar lander Nova-C. It's a cylindrical spacecraft, as long as a sedan and slightly wider than the height of the average person. It starts its engine and begins its journey. First, the lander makes a circle around Earth. This is a gravitational maneuver that helps it to gain speed without wasting too much fuel. Because the lunar lander is still in orbit, Earth's gravity affects it. The spacecraft looks as if it's falling, but not to the surface of our planet, along its orbital trajectory. After one lap around Earth, the lander adjusts its trajectory and heads for the moon. The distance it needs to cover is 238,600 miles. That's like 9.5 trips around Earth, or 93 trips across the United States from coast to coast. Modern spacecraft can cover this distance in as little as 9 hours. That's a bit more than a journey from New York to Los Angeles by plane. At the same time, it took the first astronauts about 72 hours to get to the moon. Soon, Nova-C is near its destination. It makes another circle around the moon while it descends. Scientists have already chosen the perfect plane for it to land. There are several requirements. First of all, there should be signs that there might be ice under the surface in this location. Second, the lunar module should be able to maintain radio communication with Earth. And this is impossible if the lander is on the far side of the moon. When the first astronauts flew around Earth's natural satellite, contact with them was lost for a few minutes. The connection only resumed when their spacecraft came out of the lunar shadow. And the last requirement for the landing area is sunlight. The lander has solar panels to power its scientific equipment, onboard computers, and communication modules, so it needs direct sunlight. The lander is getting closer to the surface of the moon. The spacecraft is slowing down as it approaches the landing site. Now, it's almost hovering in midair. A few more seconds, and touchdown! The spacecraft makes a soft landing. It's time to drill through the surface. For this, the lander has a device called the regolith, an ice drill for exploring new terrain. To put it simply, it's a large, 3-foot-long drill. That's almost as long as a grown-up person's leg. Once the right spot is chosen, the device gets lowered into the lunar soil. Drilling will have several stages. Lander will have to lift the drill several times to get the soil out of the drill hole. Otherwise, it may damage the drill bit. Next, the lander will have to analyze the soil composition. To do this, it carries a mass spectrometer, observing lunar operations. Shortly, M-SOLO. Its work is based on a simple principle. It ionizes or charges particles of soil, making them move. Then it creates a strong magnetic field, which affects the charged particles, making them change their trajectory. Different substances, their molecules, and atoms move differently in the magnetic field. So, by analyzing the changes in their trajectories, we can identify the mass and charge of each particle. All we need to do next is look at Mendeleev's periodic table and see which atoms we can find in the samples. Scientists hope to find H2O, water. The south pole of the moon is an ideal place to keep ice within reach of our drill. The equator would be a great place to maintain radio contact and power the solar panels of the lander, but this area is likely to be too hot to have any ice. The lander will also carry a lunar hopper. This thing will be used to explore the surface of the moon. It will carry a load of about 2 pounds. Scientists will also test 4G communication technology. The lander should have some special modules for this. If the test is successful, people might be able to use cellular coverage for communication on the moon, like we do on Earth. But the main goal of the mission is to prove that the resources found on the moon can be used in the future. As early as 2023, NASA plans to send an autonomous rover called Viper, which stands for the Volatiles Investigating Polar Exploration Rover, to the moon. It'll land at the moon's south pole for the same reasons: the connection with Earth and sunlight. The rover itself will be about the size of a golf cart. It'll carry a drill and soil analyzer. Scientists have already laid out a route for the rover. It's about 10 to 15 miles long. It'll take Viper 100 days to travel along that route. It'll drill the soil in search of lunar ice and mark its findings on the map. It will be necessary to prepare for astronauts' arrival to the moon. It'll also help to provide them with valuable resources, like water. Later in the 20s, NASA will launch the Artemis mission. For this purpose, scientists have been constructing the Orion spacecraft for decades. It can carry 6 astronauts. The launch vehicle that will take Orion into orbit is called the Space Launch System. When ready, it'll be the most powerful rocket in human history. The first flight will be uncrewed. It's scheduled for 2022. Like the lunar lander, the spaceship will ascend into orbit, make one revolution around our planet, and go to the moon. Once it reaches the satellite, it'll stay in orbit for 6 days and then return to Earth. It'll spend a total of 25 days in outer space. The second mission is planned for September 2023. This time, we'll send 4 astronauts to the moon. They will fly around Earth's natural satellite and return without landing on the lunar surface. This will be the first crewed mission to the moon since 1972. The third mission, Artemis 3, is scheduled for the 55th anniversary of the first lunar landing in 2024. 4 astronauts will travel to the moon's orbit. Once there, 2 of them will move to the Starship HLS. This is a new lunar lander designed by SpaceX. Then they will make a soft landing on the moon's surface. The astronauts will spend several days there. Then the lander will fly back into orbit, dock with Orion, and return to Earth. There's also plans to build a space station in lunar orbit, the Lunar Orbitable Platform Gateway. It'll be almost like the International Space Station. It'll be assembled from a lot of modules, just like the ISS. There will be a power and propulsion element. This is going to be the first module equipped with engines for maneuvering and propulsion. There will also be solar panels that will power the station. One more module will serve several purposes, including communication and refueling. Then, there will be several living modules. They will be able to host several astronauts for a period of up to 90 days. That's where they will eat, sleep, train, and conduct scientific experiments. The station will be equipped with a robotic arm. It'll help spacecraft dock with the station, as well as install additional scientific equipment outside the station. There will be an airlock module. Incoming spacecraft will be able to dock with the station there. It'll be like a parking lot for dropping off and picking up passengers. Astronauts will be able to use it as a door to outer space. There will be a sample return vehicle, a small spacecraft that will deliver samples of lunar soil to the station. It'll be fully robotic. The gateway will be much smaller than the ISS. For comparison, the near-Earth station now consists of 11 modules, and its total cost is about $150 billion. In the future, we'll use this station as a launch pad to send spaceships to other planets, like Mars, or into deep space. Rockets launched from the ISS will need much less fuel because they won't have to fight Earth's gravity. But the astronauts on the Gateway will be in more danger than on the ISS because of radiation. Earth's magnetic field acts as a shield that disperses the sun's harmful rays. And astronauts staying there don't get much more radiation than the passengers of a commercial airplane on Earth. The moon is too far from our planet's magnetic field, so all the modules of the Gateway station will have to be additionally protected from solar radiation.
We just found the biggest clue ever that someone lived on Mars. Or should I say, something. Because if you're picturing skinny red extraterrestrials with big goofy eyes, forget it. The Martians we're talking about looked more like this, a tiny microbe. I know, a total bummer, but this could change everything. See that weird pattern on the rock? The one that looks like leopard spots? Experts think it was left behind by ancient life. And no, it's not like someone painted it, the way early humans drew on cave walls. These little marks could actually be leftovers from microbes, signs that some pretty wild chemical reactions were happening back when they were formed. And don't worry, we'll get to that in just a second. So NASA actually found this evidence over a year ago, and they were thrilled, as this was exactly the kind of weird rock they'd been hoping to see on Mars. They thought this weird pattern might be a biosignature. In other words, a clue that life was once there. That could mean an element, a molecule, some substance, or in this case, a funky leopard print pattern on a rock. But scientists were cautious back then. After all, you can't just go around shouting, "We found life on Mars," without being absolutely sure. It could have just been, well, a cool-looking Martian rock, right? So, they studied this sample again and again. And by they, I mean more than 1,000 scientists from NASA and partner institutions all over the world. And recently, they finally came out with a paper that basically says, listen, we can't find another explanation. And that's it. With no other explanation left, this might just be the best evidence we've ever had that something really did live on Mars. The sample, nicknamed Sapphire Canyon, was collected by the Perseverance rover in July 2024. It was taken from rocky cliffs along the edges of the Neretva Vallis River Valley, a region shaped long ago by water that once flowed into Jezero Crater. And we're talking like more than 3 billion years ago. Scientists believe that back then, Neretva Vallis was filled with rushing rivers carrying mud, sand, and gravel into the lake. When the water eventually dried up, it left behind the rocky outcrop where Sapphire Canyon was found. After collecting the sample, the Perseverance rover kept exploring the river valley to get a better idea of the environment where those rocks formed, and to figure out how those leopard spots might have appeared. That step matters because knowing exactly how the spots came to be is key to figuring out if the rock really holds signs of life. In other words, did those patterns form through normal chemical processes that don't need life at all? Or were they actually left behind by microbes? What the rover's instruments found is that the rocks in this area are made of clay and silt, which is exciting. Because here on Earth, those materials are great at preserving signs of ancient microbial life. The rocks are also packed with organic carbon, sulfur, oxidized iron, and phosphorus. And you know who loves that stuff? Microbes. Experts think they could have used those ingredients as an energy source, and in the process, left behind the leopard spots we can now see in high-resolution images. Remember when I said these marks might be a microbe's leftovers, right? That's exactly it. Picture you're eating a burger called the Galaxy Burger that has a one-of-a-kind sauce. A drop of that sauce falls on the table. You don't clean it up, and a second later, poof, you disappear. Later, detectives show up trying to figure out if you were there. All they find is that sauce drop you left over. From that, they can tell exactly what you were eating. the Galaxy Burger. But proving you were really there is tricky, since that sauce could have ended up there in lots of other ways. The same goes for the leopard spots. Just by looking at them, scientists can already tell a few things. For example, the pattern shows the presence of two iron-rich minerals, vivianite and greigite. On Earth, vivianite often turns up in sediments near decaying organic matter, or in swampy, soggy wetlands. In a similar way, microbes can also produce greigite on our planet. When you find those two together, it looks like they formed through electron transfer reactions between the sediment and organic matter. That could be a fingerprint of microbial life, because microbes use those reactions to get energy and grow. So, going back to our burger comparison, the leopard spots are like the sauce on the table, the leftovers from the process of getting energy. But that's not the only theory. The team also spotted the possible presence of hematite in the rock. And if Mars has the nickname the Red Planet, hematite is the one to blame. It's a heavy mineral that can take on a reddish tone. On Earth, people have been using it as a pigment for paint for thousands of years. Now, scientists think the leopard spots may have formed when chemical reactions with hematite turned parts of the rock from red to white. That process can release iron and phosphate and possibly cause those black rings to appear. And here's the kicker. Those reactions can also provide an energy source for microbes. For now, though, these are just theories. What we can confirm is that those chemical compounds are definitely present in the rocks. But just like in the detective story, finding the sauce drop doesn't prove it came from you. So even though these materials are great for microbes to thrive on, it doesn't automatically mean this is a biosignature. They could have also formed abiotically, or, put simply, without the presence of life. Yeah, it could happen, but for it to happen naturally, without microbes involved, you'd need two things: high temperatures and acidic conditions. That's the only way those chemical processes could do their magic and leave behind the leopard spots. And here's the exciting part. Scientists didn't find any sign that these Martian rocks were ever exposed to high heat or acidic conditions. That's why I said they're stumped. They just can't find another explanation. So this has to be a biosignature, right? Well, maybe not. Because there's still a possibility that organic compounds could react even under low temperatures. And maybe, just maybe, we're seeing that happening for the very first time. That's why it's so hard to confirm 100% whether this is the handiwork of ancient microbes or just a natural process. So, in the end, we're still left with more questions than answers. Right now, this precious sample is safely sealed inside a tube millions of miles away on Mars. Hopefully, one day, it'll be brought back to Earth so scientists can study it in labs here. And while we can't confirm it's a biosignature just yet, one thing is certain. This finding by Perseverance is the closest we've ever come to discovering life on Mars. Honestly, just being able to spot a potential biosignature on the Red Planet is already groundbreaking. Another reason this finding matters has to do with the age of the rock. This evidence comes from some of the youngest sedimentary rocks we've ever studied. Until now, scientists thought that if we ever found signs of ancient life on Mars, they'd most likely be locked inside much older rocks. But so far, nothing has shown up in those ancient formations. Finding a possible biosignature in a young rock suggests two things. First, Mars might have been habitable for longer or later in its history than we ever thought. And second, older rocks might also hold signs of life, but maybe they're just harder to spot. Someday, our technology could be advanced enough to find them. This discovery also makes us think about one of the biggest questions of all, and that is, are we truly alone in the universe, or did we just find the answer? No, not exactly, but it's the closest humanity has ever come to answering that question.